And here we go.
Welcome to the Great Work Insights Podcast by the O.C. Tanner Institute, the show that features the people, the professionals, the thought leaders, and the coolest companies. And now your host, the man navigating the discussion about the culture, the organized chaos, and the best practices that compel great work, Todd Nordstrom.
Let me ask you a question I really want you to consider before you answer. Ready? Here it is. Are you a positive person? Are you an optimist? Or would you consider yourself a realist? Your outlook is based on statistics, facts, or evidence. Or would you actually say that you admit you're a pessimist. You can spot the worst thing possible from a mile away. Think about it for a second. Do you have your answer yet? Were you honest with your answer? It's my hunch that most of you listening would respond by saying that you're either an optimist or maybe a realist. Few people like to admit that they're the Debbie Downer in the room. In fact, if I surveyed listeners, I bet I would end up with a very small percentage of you that claim to be pessimists. Here's an interesting twist to the question, though. Think about this. What if I surveyed all of you and slightly changed the question to ask this instead? How many pessimists do you know? How many people do you know that are constantly complaining? People that seem to live under that rain cloud, right? People that no matter how excited you might be about a project or an opportunity would look you square in the eye and say, yeah, well, life, it's really just not that easy. You'd probably be able to name quite a few pessimists, wouldn't you? I met my guest today nearly a decade ago when he was the keynote speaker at a conference I was attending. I distinctly remember a story he told during that speech that I'm going to ask him to share today because his words and the story have stuck with me ever since. Today's guest is the president and CEO of Verbalocity Incorporated, a personal development company that focuses on leadership enhancement. He's a decorated author and a professional speaker who has traveled the world delivering high-content speeches and training to Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and trade associations. His clients include 7-Eleven, American Express, BMW, Hallmark Gold Crown, Valero Energy Corporation, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and Uno Chicago Grill. Please welcome to the show, Clint Swindall. Clint, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Clint, we've known each other for many years now, and I know we could cover a billion different topics. We could talk about engagement. We could talk about leadership. We could talk about accountability or tough conversations or wherever you want to go. We've actually talked about things like generational differences in the past, but I want to talk about attitude today because somehow you expose it better than anyone I know. How important is attitude?
Wow, it's huge on many levels, Todd. It determines the way you see the world and probably more importantly, the way the world sees you. You mentioned the pessimist and how they would say, well, life just isn't that easy. Well, the reality is we all experience hard times, physical and emotional pain, disappointment, loss, heartache. How you program your brain to handle these things will help determine your overall happiness. And sadly, the pessimist you spoke about seems to think they have all the problems in the world, and the optimist just skips through life without a care in the world. Mm-hmm. The reality is they both share many of the same issues in life. The difference is the optimist has learned to frame these experiences in their proper perspective, impacting their overall attitude.
I love that you just said reprogram your brain because it brings me back to a story you told on stage, nearly a decade ago that has just really, really stuck with me ever since because reprogramming your brain to many of the listeners might sound like a really big thing. I mean, a hard thing to do, and I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but I want you to tell the story you told on stage because it's not just about reprogramming your brain. Sometimes it's just the words you use, right?
Absolutely. And I remember that story well from a decade ago, and I remember it because I continue to share that story today because it has such an incredible impact on people, not just the day they hear that story, but years and years later. And it's a story of that woman, as you may recall, who was just extremely negative. I mean, she was the woman who wore her negativity like a badge of honor. She had this permanent scowl on her face from a lifetime of being so bitter and jaded. In fact, she was the one we'd always ask to leave the bar at 5 o'clock so we'd start happy hour. I mean, this woman was just foul. Now, one day she came into the office. She was 20 minutes late for work. She came in running through the office with a great big stack of school books in her hands for some reason, and she ran into my office. She ran past my desk, and she slammed these school books down onto this little round conference table I had in the corner. Now, she flopped down in the chair. She gave this great big belly sigh and glared at me like I had did something to screw up her day. Now, it's important to note that I am not the type of person who will ask somebody, "How you doing?" Because quite frankly, in this negative world, well, I'm afraid they'll tell me. I mean, if you really think about it, you go up to someone you see every day, you look them in the eye, and you say, "Good morning, how are you?" And they look at you and say, "Oh, you haven't heard?" I thought everybody had heard by now. And then they proceed to tell you all the crud that's going on in their life. And you're thinking, I didn't even want to know this. I was just trying to get to the coffee pot. And now I have to sit and listen to all this nonsense. Well, yeah, I fell into that trap for many years of my life. And at some point I realized the only way I would start a better conversation would be to find a better greeting. So instead of giving people the opportunity to share all the bad stuff in their life, I have a simple phrase that I throw out, and that simple phrase is this: tell me something good. I'll walk right up to someone I see every single day. I will throw my hand out and say, "Tell me something good." And you would be amazed how that one simple greeting will change the feel of that conversation. You would be amazed at how that one simple comment can change the culture of an entire organization when you send the message to the people around you that we're going to focus first on what works well, and then we'll deal with our challenges. We're not talking rose-colored glasses kind of thinking. We're simply saying, look, we have real challenges going on in our organization, and at the same time, all of us as individuals have real changes going on in our personal lives. It's not a matter of ignoring those things and sweeping those things under the rug. It's just a matter, excuse me, of saying first, we're going to focus on what we do well, and then we'll focus on what works, on whatever challenges that we have. So this employee comes running into my office. She's 20 minutes late for work. She slams the school books down on the conference table. She flops down in the chair. She gives me this great big belly sigh, and she glares at me. I wheeled around in my chair, put a great big smile on my face, and said, "Tell me something good." She said, "Oh, shut up." She said, "There ain't nothing good." And I said, "Nothing?" And she said, "Nothing." She said, "My husband and I got in a fight last night. The electricity at my house went off, so my alarm didn't go off this morning, so I got up late. So I'm running around late trying to get myself ready for work. Now, my husband would normally take our daughter to daycare, but on this particular day, since we'd been in a fight the night before, he was being his little knucklehead self like he normally is when we're in a fight, and he decided to not take our daughter to daycare. So here I am running around late trying to get myself ready for work. Now I have to stop and get my daughter ready for daycare. I finally get myself ready. Then I get my daughter ready. I get her scooped up and in the car. We go off to the daycare, and right out in front of the daycare is a great big wreck. Now, I don't know how people get in a wreck going 20 miles an hour, but apparently they do. So I have to sit and wait for them to move the wreck out of the way so I can get her dropped off. They finally get the wreck moved out of the way. I finally made my way into the office, and the first thing I have to look at is you looking at me saying, "Tell me something good." She said, "There ain't nothing good." And I said, "Wow." I said, "All that bad stuff happened to you just this morning?" And she said, "Yes." And I have a question for you. Why is it that all the bad stuff seems to happen to me, and none of it ever seems to happen to you? Do you know somebody like that, Todd?
A bunch, yeah.
They seem to think they are the only ones who have challenges in their life. And I asked her, I said, why do you think nothing bad ever happens to me? And she said, well, because I've never seen you show up to work in a bad mood. You come in here every day with a big old smile on your face and all that "tell me something good" nonsense. She said, I'm not convinced you ever have a bad day. And I said, well, you've never seen me show up to work in a bad mood, because I can think of 12 good reasons why I should be in a good mood long before I even get to work. I said, number one, I wake up. It is a small detail, but it is vital to starting a good day. I have never started a good day without that one little detail. But how many people do you know that starting the day is their first big challenge of the day? You know, I hear my alarm go off, so I know I still have the gift of hearing. You know, I look around the room with two good eyes, so I know I still have the gift of sight. I get out of a warm bed. I get up on two good legs. I walk into a warm shower. I get out, I put on clean clothes, I go into a kitchen, I eat a good breakfast, I leave a house with a roof over the top. I get into a truck that I own and I drive safely to a job that pays me to do what I love to do for a living. And I looked at this employee and I said, now how can I show up here in a bad mood? And I said, and by the way, it doesn't mean that the bad stuff that happened to you didn't happen to me. I said, we live on the same side of town, so if your electricity went out, mine probably did too. I was probably running around late, probably burned my toast, had some moron pull out in front of me on the way to work, had a train stop on the tracks, all that bad stuff that happened to you that you considered to be a tragedy, it all happened to me too. The difference is I stayed focused on what matters. And on that day, I believe I was living proof that attitude has a tremendous impact on our lives.
Love that. Love that. And, you know, ever since I've heard that story, I use it to tell me something good with my kids, because I can see their little faces come through the door after school or whatever. And I'll say, tell me something good. And it every single time takes them off guard too. It's fantastic. You know, it's interesting. I just read about a small study by correlated.com that stated 28% of survey respondents that they studied were actually pessimists. Do you think 28% is a fair percentage?
Yeah, you know, Todd, that's probably a fair percentage, just over 1 in 4. I think sometimes what happens is we as individuals, if we're around those pessimists long enough, if we're around people who wallow around in that misery long enough, I think we become like them. But I don't think it truly changes who we are. And I think sometimes we look around and we think, man, it seems like everybody is so negative all the time. Everybody seems to be such a pessimist. But I think if you get some of those people away from those true pessimists, I think ultimately you get an opportunity to see them in their real light and realize that they were an optimist wearing pessimist clothes. They were around it so long they just became like it. But I think 28% is probably a fair percentage, but I do know for sure that our language alone can impact our attitudes.
Well, and it's interesting too, because it's like you said that you even, you know, when you had this conversation, you felt like you had gotten trapped into it. You work with many massive companies, as I mentioned before. What do you see as some of the biggest struggles of organizations or leaders or people in general? What do they face?
And you're right. I mean, they face so many different challenges as organizations, leaders, and people in general. But without a question, for me, the biggest struggle is the ongoing challenge of employee disengagement. Mm-hmm. You know, according to the Gallup organization, 3 out of 4 employees are at some level of disengagement. It's the foundation of the work that I've done over the last 15 years. And, you know, research shows disengagement is costing corporations billions of dollars every year. It's not customer service, which, by the way, I think is linked directly to employee engagement. Mm-hmm. But some people think that employee turnover is hurting companies, and it is, but nowhere near as bad as employee disengagement, where the employee essentially quits but forgets to tell anyone and continues to show up every day collecting a paycheck and breeding mediocrity and spreading that disengagement to coworkers.
Wow. Clint, you've written 2 highly successful books. Your first was titled Engaged Leadership, Building a Culture to Overcome Employee Disengagement, just like you were just talking about. And your latest was Living for the Weekday, What Every Employee and Boss Needs to Know About Enjoying Work and Life. I love that little "and life" in that subtitle. Talk to us about what it means to live for the weekday, and are work and life really that connected? Some people I would argue, yes, they're absolutely connected, and some others would say, nope, I separate them completely. What's your take?
Well, 2 things. One, those who argue that your work life and your home life should remain separate simply don't get it. We are one person, and the emotions that come from each will always carry over into the other. So if you have a fight with your spouse in the morning and it isn't resolved by the time you get to work, mm-hmm. It's not possible to, quote unquote, leave it at the door and pick it back up on your way out at the end of the day. It will affect your work. Likewise, if you have a negative encounter with your boss at the end of your work day and it's not possible to, quote unquote, leave it at the office and deal with it the next day, it will affect your home life. We are one person, and we must find a way to integrate work and home life. And 2, related to living for the weekday, it seemed to me that everyone around me was living for the weekend. When when I wrote my first book, Engaged Leadership, when John Wiley and Sons out of New York called and said, "Hey, we want to do a second book. What are you experiencing out in the real world?" And I said, well, Engaged Leadership was about the leader's role in overcoming employee disengagement. And I said, but the reality is employees have a contribution as well. And I said, when I look at employees, it seems like everyone out there is just living for the weekend. It seems as though everyone's just having a countdown to Friday with the assumption that a 2-day respite at the end of the week would be all it took to get over dragging themselves through 5 days at work. And this act of counting down the days to the weekend, quite frankly, that often contributes to 3 out of 4 employees being disengaged at work. So living for the weekday, again, is the employee's responsibility in building that culture of engagement, because it doesn't matter how hard the leadership of an organization works to build a culture of engagement if the employees don't do their part. And the concept is that employees have a responsibility to focus on 5 areas of their life in order to get them in the right frame of mind. Real quickly, the first one is your career. Most of us work because we aren't financially independent, and we become addicted to things like food, shelter, and transportation, and we have to work to support our habits. So career is certainly one aspect of life, but it's only one. And I have found that the real cause of imbalance or dissatisfaction lies in the other 4 areas. And the second area consists of the relationships in our life. We can't be fully engaged at work if we don't have good relationships with our coworkers. We can't be fully engaged at work if we can't get along with our spouse. We can't be fully engaged at work if we have children, grown children, who won't talk to us. Yeah. Relationships or a lack thereof then contributes greatly to our overall satisfaction, which ultimately ties directly to our engagement on the job. The third aspect is our health. We can't be fully engaged at work if we feel lousy every day, because we eat what we want and we drink what we want with no concern about our health. When I was doing research for this book, I was looking at what everybody else had written on life balance or some form of that, and very seldom did I ever hear anybody talking about health. They were talking about basically time issues. You have to balance your time at home and at work. Well, by definition, balance is an equality of distribution, and you're never going to have an equality of distribution of time between work and home. So you have to look deeper than that. You have to drill down deeper. And so one of those aspects is health, because throughout my lifetime, I've seen a ton of people who were very capable at their job. They were very educated. They were even motivated to do their job. They had good results, but every day they drug themselves to work, and ultimately that affected their level of engagement. The fourth aspect is finance. We can't be fully engaged at work if we aren't certain whether or not we can pay our mortgage. I don't care how good everything else is. We can't be fully engaged at work if we aren't certain we can make our car payment. Too often we blame these concerns on the fact we don't make enough money, when often it has more to do with how we manage the money we have, not necessarily the amount of money that we make. And the fifth aspect is spirituality. It's the bigger purpose of our lives. If we live this life just for ourselves and we bounce out of bed every day, or I say bounce, really it's more like drag yourself out of bed every day, and you go to work and you get off work and you take care of your kids and you spend time with your spouse and you eat dinner, you watch some TV, you go to bed and you wake up the next day and you start the process all over again, then ultimately you're not living for a bigger purpose. You're just living to get from one day to the next. And so I'm a firm believer we have to live for something bigger than ourselves. And when you put these 5 areas together, career, relationships, health, finance, spirituality, and you get to a place where you're satisfied in each of these areas, not balanced and not perfect, but a place where you're satisfied in these areas, you're going to find more satisfaction in your life, which will ultimately enhance your chance of looking forward to Monday as much as you look forward to Friday.
I love that. Love that. Those 5 things. And I was just, as you were going through them, I was thinking, if you took each one of those areas and asked yourself the question, tell me something good in each one of those areas, you'd probably start in a pretty good process to figuring all those areas out.
Exactly right.
Clint, I know you travel a lot. I follow you a lot on social media, so I know you're a big barbecue fan, and you give a champagne toast every Friday, and you're a huge philanthropist. You don't need to sell me on barbecue, but why is giving back? Why is Sorry, I'm stuttering now. Being a philanthropist is such a big deal.
Well, first of all, giving back is the reason my wife Heather and I do everything that we do. I mean, it's ultimately our bigger purpose. When we went back and looked at those 5 areas, and we realized at some point in our life that we were doing a lot of what everybody else was doing. We were just living. We were just going from one day to the next, and we were successful in business and we were successful in life. But ultimately, it was about us, and it was just about what we needed to do. And at some point in our lives, it was put on our heart, God put it on our heart, that we had a responsibility to go out and to help other people, specifically to help people who are disadvantaged, kids who are disadvantaged. And that's probably our most significant contribution from a philanthropy standpoint. We do a lot. We serve on various boards in our community, but probably our most significant is our foundation for abandoned, abused, and neglected children. It's called the First Chance Foundation. We realized that there are a lot of organizations out there that are designed to give kids a second chance. You know, they got involved in gangs, they got involved in drugs, they got involved in alcohol at a young age. Maybe they just grew up in an abusive relationship, and in many cases, these programs are designed, and these foundations are designed to give kids a second chance. But we realize that these kids who have been abandoned, abused, and neglected, they don't need a second chance. They need a first chance. Mm-hmm. So 10 years ago this year, we created the First Chance Foundation. And I'm like everyone else. There are days I don't want to get out of bed and go to work. But when I think about all the kids we're impacting through the foundation, and one of the ways that we encourage donations to our foundation is Verbalocity, our company, pays every single dime of expense for our foundation, so that we can ensure that and assure to our donors that 100% of their contribution goes directly to help a child, and that there's no administrative cost to that. And that's something that we started 10 years ago, and we continue to do that today. And again, it's sometimes the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning when I really don't want to go get on a plane. But again, it's the reason for everything we do.
Number 5. It's a number 5, right?
That's it. Exactly.
Purpose. Yeah.
Exactly.
So what's next for Clint Swindall?
Wow, what's next? Great things, I'm hoping, and great things, I'm sure. You know, we're celebrating 15 years of Verbalocity in a couple of weeks, which is a pretty exciting thing for us. You know, research shows most businesses never make it past 3 years, and I think 10% or 20% make it to 5 years, or whatever the statistics are. And we're celebrating 15 years of Verbalocity in a couple of weeks. So we'll stop that night to raise a glass, and we'll celebrate that. And then we'll get up the next morning, and we'll continue to find ways to change lives one speech at a time. You know, my goal at our 10-year company anniversary just 5 years ago was to have a positive impact on 1 million people over the next decade. I have no idea when we'll get there. There's no way to track that. Something I don't think we'll actually know until we get to the other side. Yeah. But knowing every day that the goal is to impact or to have a positive impact on 1 million people over the next decade, it gives a reason to never lay in bed for a day and say, wow, you know, I don't think I want to do anything today. 1 million people over 10 years is a lot of people. So we're going to bounce out of bed that next day, and we're going to go continue every single day to figure out how to have that impact over the next 5 years.
Wow. Congratulations on 15 years, Clint. You are a force. And if listeners wanted to find you, find out more about you and Verbalocity, where's the best place to look?
Well, a couple of different places. First, we have our corporate site, which has a whole array of things that we offer from a company standpoint, and they can go to www.verbalocity.com. There's a link there at verbalocity.com that will take them over to our blog at clintswindall.com, and that's a leadership blog that I post on every week. And then if you want more information about our foundation, you can go to firstchancefoundation.org. And once you get to clintswindall.com, there are links to all of those different sites, and they're kind of all tied together. And again, it goes back to our belief that we are one person, we live one life, and ultimately we can't separate the two, and nor do we ever try to separate the two. We believe that it's that we're all in, so we just encourage everybody, if you get a chance, go check those out, and I hope you would find some things of value.
Clint, thanks as always. You're always an inspiration because you always tell me something good. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Todd. You do the same.
O.C. Tanner has helped the world's top companies improve innovation through employee recognition. Learn what insights are in store for your company. Visit octanner.com today.